This is True News, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help us God. I'm Rick Wiles. The United States has placed approximately 8,500 troops on standby for possible deployment to Eastern Europe to strengthen NATO forces near Ukraine. As many as 50,000 U.S. troops could eventually be sent to the Eastern Front. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said on Sunday that Russia had massed 60 battle groups on its border for a lightning war to capture control of Kyiv, Ukraine's capital city. He said such a move would be a disastrous step for Russia and that it would be painful, violent, and bloody. President Joe Biden held a video call with European leaders today to discuss a NATO war with Russia, and stock markets around the world slid on Monday as war fever increases and U.S. Federal Reserve stimulus money decreases. Doc Burkhardt and I will give you a one-hour synopsis of the most important headlines on these topics today. Well, Doc, a lot has happened since we were here on Friday.
Yes.
And if we had any doubts on Friday that NATO would actually do something as stupid as start a war with Russia, today, on Monday, those doubts are not there.
Right.
We appear to be, the world appears to be heading towards a clash between NATO and Russia. And it just seems so ludicrous that this is actually happening and that this madness is running away without any sane people anywhere on the planet saying, stop it. What are you doing? Where are the voices of sanity?
Unfortunately, it appears the voices of sanity are on the Russian side. Ambassador Lavrov, even Vladimir Putin are sounding sane in this whole situation, Rick.
I know.
And they're just simply responding to everything that NATO is doing. They'll say, NATO will say, well, you've got 100,000 troops on the border. But it's on their border.
Yes.
No one would criticize the United States for having 100,000 troops, on the Texas border, bordering Mexico, would they? Why? Because it's United States territory.
Yes. But I wish we had 100,000 troops on the Texas border.
That would solve a lot of issues.
That would be great. American politicians are worried about Ukraine's border, but they don't care about America's border.
You got it, Rick. That's right. The only border they care about is the Ukrainian border, not the U.S. border.
Any other border but America's border. And you talk about America's border, and they get crazy and loopy if you talk about the need to defend America's border. They call you a racist and everything else.
Yes.
And then they want to start a war over Ukraine's border, which has no bearing on America whatsoever. And Russia doesn't want a war with NATO on this. But they see the troop buildup and they know what's coming, and that is an invasion of Russia.
Yes.
So here we are today on Monday, and it's hard to believe that this is happening. I've been talking about a war with Russia since 1998. I mean, this is a long time, Doc. And I've watched things heat up and then cool down. But this is the hottest I've seen in these 20-some years. This is the closest we've ever been to a war with Russia. And I'm praying, I'm hoping this thing's going to subside, that somehow, somewhere, somebody will step in and resolve this matter and prevent this clash from taking place. But we're going to show our audience today some of the top headlines that are out this afternoon that signify how serious this is, how close we are to actually going to war. Because when these things start happening, the smallest thing can be the trigger event.
That's right. One mistake, one misspoken word. Yes. That's all it takes.
Yes. So the first one, CNN, U.S. places up to 8,500 troops on alert for possible deployment to Eastern Europe amid Russia tensions.
So this is breaking this afternoon, of course, and we were expecting an announcement today. Up to 8,500 U.S. troops have been put on heightened alert for a possible deployment to Eastern Europe as Russian troops mass On Ukraine's border, Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said Monday, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin issued the prepare to deploy orders at the direction of President Joe Biden. Kirby said no final decision to deploy the troops had been made. Earlier on Monday, CNN reported the Biden administration was in the final stages of identifying specific military units it wants to send to Eastern Europe. According to multiple U.S. and defense officials, Biden discussed options for bolstering U.S. troop levels in the Baltics and Eastern Europe with his top military officials during a briefing at Camp David on Saturday, according to the Pentagon official, the senior official there. We actually have John Kirby's announcement here. Let's watch.
I want to provide some facts on these preparations that will reinforce our commitment to NATO and to the NATO response force and increase our readiness. Secretary Austin has placed a range of units in the United States on a heightened preparedness to deploy, which increases our readiness to provide forces if NATO should activate the NRF or if other situations develop. All told, the number of forces that the Secretary has placed on heightened alert comes up to about 8,500 personnel.
So the NRF is the NATO response force, and so any announcement by NATO to activate that would trigger the 8,500 troops being activated. However, there are already troops around the country that are being deployed to strategic locations.
You just got a tip just a few minutes before we started.
Right. We know that members of the 82nd Airborne up in Fort Bragg have already been given deployment orders to Europe. We don't know where in Europe, but obviously not into the Eastern European theater yet. But we do know that at least the Airborne Rangers have been activated out of the 82nd Airborne. So this has been developing all through the day today. Daily Mail earlier today reported that the president was in final stages of identifying the military units of up to 50,000 troops.
Not 8,500,
yeah.
50,000 troops.
That's the number.
When you see these kind of numbers, you're talking war.
Right. So, and also warships and aircraft to send to NATO allies in Eastern Europe. So President Biden is considering deploying several thousand troops together with warships and aircraft to NATO allied countries located in the Baltics. Both the United States and the United Kingdom are set to withdraw some diplomats from their embassies in Kyiv, and that's been going on throughout the day today. Although a number of European countries have said they have no intention to remove diplomats yet. The European Union has said it will not yet pull its diplomats from Kyiv and warned against dramatizing the situation as other Western governments begin to cautiously evacuate their citizens. So during a meeting at Camp David over the weekend, Pentagon officials outlined various options to President Biden. Options would see American military might move a step closer to Russian borders. And among strategies being considered, between 1,000 to 5,000 troops could be relocated to countries in Eastern Europe. We saw that number now is going to be 8,500. And there would also be a potential to increase to 50,000 should the need arise. And so that was being reported earlier today. So we see the developments as they've been progressing throughout the day. NATO itself made the announcement that a number of other allies are planning on sending ships and jets to enhance deterrence and defense in Eastern Europe. And so they made the announcement here on their website. In the past days, a number of allies have made announcements regarding current or upcoming deployments. Denmark is sending a frigate to the Baltic Sea and is set to deploy 4 F-16 fighter jets to Lithuania in support of NATO's longstanding air policing mission in the region. Spain is sending ships to join NATO naval forces and is considering sending fighter jets to Bulgaria. France has expressed its readiness to send troops to Romania under NATO command. The Netherlands is sending 2 F-35 fighter aircraft to Bulgaria from April to support NATO's air policing activities in the region, and is putting a ship and land-based units on standby for NATO's response force. And the U.S. has also made clear that it's considering increasing its military presence in the eastern part of the alliance, as we've seen that announcement today. Rick, I do see a country that's not being listed here, and that's Germany. Germany's not on that list.
Yeah, and this over the weekend and today, various stories coming out of Europe indicating Germany is opting out. The German leadership does not want in this war. And it may be because of a story I saw on a Russian news site today that natural gas reserves in Germany and other parts of Europe are at historic lows. Okay. That might explain why Germany is having second thoughts about going to war with Russia.
And we saw a story back Thursday or Friday or last week that Germany, other NATO aircraft were actually avoiding Germany, flying around Germany to get aid to Ukraine. So if you had flights going from the UK to the Ukraine, they would actually detour around Germany so as not to, use their airspace at all or anything like that. In addition to these countries that we mentioned, there are also a number of other countries that have already made their donation to the cause in Ukraine. This is from UK Inform. Lithuania is set to transfer U.S. Stinger missiles, Rick, as well as thermal imagers to Ukraine. So Lithuania will transfer U.S.-made Stinger manned portable air defense mission systems to the Ukrainian Army and thermal imagers to the Ukrainian Special Forces. That's according to the Ministry of National Defense of Lithuania. The ministry also stated that Latvia would provide man pads to Ukraine, and Estonia plans to transfer Javelin anti-tank missiles. The assistance is granted after the U.S. government approved the transfer of U.S.-made equipment to a third country. It didn't name the third country, as you notice there.
Okay, so there's two things in that story right there. Number one, where did Lithuania and Estonia and Latvia get these weapons?
They got them from the U.S.
They didn't make them themselves, did they?
No.
So the U.S. supplied them.
Yes.
That's the first point. The second point is Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia just made themselves targets for Russian missiles.
That's right.
That was the stupidest thing they could do. They just became targets. They've sent weapons to Ukraine to kill Russians.
So they're in for the whole haul on this, aren't they?
So they become targets in a war. Very dumb thing to do.
We also have a report getting sent to us. Martha McCullum is announcing right now through the Pentagon spokesperson that Javelin anti-tank missiles arriving soon to Ukraine from the United States. So it's direct shipment. Air defense systems are being rushed in. There's a lot more coming. And so in addition to what you're reading there, Rick, we also have more coming from the U.S. too.
I was just thinking here, Doc, while we were reading that. My mind was going back in time and history, things that I could remember in my lifetime. It hasn't been that long ago, a few decades. So it depends on how old you are, whether a few decades is a long time ago,
or just the good old days, right?
Just back in the day, okay. But back in the day, there was a time when America's political left was anti-war.
Right.
And America's political right, wasn't called anti-war, it was called isolationist.
Right.
Isolationists said, keep America's nose out of foreign wars.
Right.
The political left said, make peace, not...
Make love, not war.
Yeah, make love, not war. Just stay out of wars. Both sides actually kept the United States out of war.
However, now the political left and the political right are both controlled by warmongers. Yes.
So, the Republican Party had, for many decades, there were two factions of the Republican Party. Some people called it Main Street, Wall Street.
Right.
Okay. There were the isolationists and the interventionists. So throughout the 20th century, those political pressures were within the Republican Party. And so national campaigns for president, for U.S. senator and Congress
would revolve around.
They would revolve around isolationism versus internationalism.
Right.
Okay. In more modern times, the Bush family represented the interventionalists, the internationalism. Okay. The Pat Buchanans represented the kind of the last gasp of isolationism. The real change came in the 50s when General Dwight Eisenhower was the favored candidate of the internationalists. I mean, he was the war hero.
Right.
World War II, commander of NATO or Allied forces in the war. When Eisenhower ran in 1952 for the Republican Party nomination, he didn't win this thing easy. He had a very serious primary campaign. I mean, a lot of people don't know that, but Eisenhower had to fight for the nomination. His opponent was Senator Robert Taft of Ohio.
Yes.
Taft was the leading voice of isolationism.
Right.
America, stay out of foreign wars, which was based on the advice of George Washington. In his speech as he left the presidency, he said his wish was America would not get entangled in foreign wars.
Yes.
And so a lot of patriots said, let's go with Washington's advice and not fight these foreign wars. Woodrow Wilson campaigned as a Democrat that he would keep America out of European wars.
And yet
he led us into World War I. Who was in the Wilson White House? Who was the manipulator behind the scenes? Colonel House. Colonel House was the globalist. He was the CFR member before there was a CFR.
Right.
He was Bilderberg before there was Bilderberg. Colonel House. House manipulated Wilson into entering World War I. The globalists have always had their handlers inside the American White House to get another war.
Well, President Trump, he campaigned as an isolationist, really.
He bombed Syria, didn't he?
Yes.
And he stole Syrian oil and bragged about it. But he had his handlers. So in every White House for the past 100 years, the international banksters have had their handlers inside the White House.
Right.
So this is what's happening right now. I mean, if anybody thinks Joe Biden is making these decisions, you're really naive. He's irrelevant. He's absolutely irrelevant. But somebody else is making these decisions to take America to war. It's what we call the shadow government. The shadow government that put Biden in the White House is who is pushing him right now to sign off. They're just putting documents in front of him. Sign it, Joe. We need troops. Sign it, Joe. And he's signing. He's doing what he's told to do. The point I'm making is there are no voices left in America for peace.
That's right. Where are the peaceniks now? Remember? There were the people that were crying out 60s and 70s for peace. They were given the name peaceniks and stuff. But where are there? There aren't anyone calling for peace. I think we're the only ones that's saying, let's have some peace. What would happen if peace broke out in the world?
In the Democratic Party, where's George McGovern? Where's Gene McCarthy? Where are they? They spoke out against the Vietnam War in the Democratic Party. Where are they today? The Democratic Party is calling for war. Adam Schiff.
Oh, yes.
You go down the line of the top Democrats.
Oh, no. This is a both sides of the aisle war. Definitely that. So
Mitch McConnell's calling for war.
Oh, Mitch McConnell. I mean, I think he'd go in and nuke him himself if he could. I mean, he has some. Every time I've heard Mitch McConnell on Fox or anyone else talk about it, it's like Russia is the end all. I mean, we've got to stop Russia at all costs.
That's right.
So
he doesn't get worked up about anything else.
No.
But boy, when you talk about Russia, he wants to kill him.
Yes.
That's because there is not a Democratic Party and a Republican Party. There is only the perpetual sleaze, corruption, war, and pedophilia party. That's the name of the party. That's what should be on the voting machine, on the ballot. You're voting for you're choosing between the two candidates of the same party. The perpetual war, sleaze, corruption, and pedophilia party. Because that's what those two parties represent. There's two factions of the same party. You can vote Democrat or Republican, and you get the same thing. So there's nobody in the Republican Party speaking out against war. There's nobody in the Democratic Party speaking out against war. In fact, they're all calling for war. And this is...
That's because war is somewhere else. War is far away. No one cares. You know, they know that the American people don't care about war because they just see it on TV. It's all, you know, they see more violence on their favorite TV shows than they see in the news.
This one may be the one where we see it in your living room.
That's right, where it comes home to us. So, well, what they do try to do is they try to manage the information, but sometimes they just don't even try to hide it anymore. I don't know if you've seen this, Rick. This is a tweet from the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. I wanted to read it to you. This is talking about the first shipment of military equipment that got there in the Ukraine. It says the first shipment of assistance recently directed by President Biden to Ukraine arrived in Ukraine tonight. This shipment includes close to 200,000 pounds of lethal aid.
Lethal aid?
Lethal aid, including ammunition for the frontline defenders of Ukraine. Now, Rick...
That's from the U.S. Embassy.
Yes. So have you ever, in your 20-plus years of doing True News, ever heard the term lethal aid before?
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
Oh, this is my first one for me.
But never from the State Department.
Yeah. But yeah,
the State Department is supposed to do diplomacy.
Right. This is still live up on their website, by the way. Now, other outlets tried to cover their tracks. So earlier today, NPR, so I caught this. This was their headline earlier today.
National Propaganda Radio.
Right. And so 90 tons of U.S. lethal aid arrives in Ukraine as border tensions with Russia rise. So you notice they came, whatever the State Department said, they just went with it. But now, if you go to NPR, 90 tons of U.S. military aid arrives in Ukraine as border tensions with Russia
The military aid doesn't
sound quite as bad.
Doesn't kill you like lethal aid does.
Like lethal aid does. But you see how they manage the information, they manage the propaganda that comes out. And so this is another thing that we try to do here at True News is try to sort through all this, false narrative that goes on.
And these headlines, as you point out, these headlines change
throughout
the day. We see a headline in the morning, and by the time we come out here to do this newscast, the headlines change.
And then people accuse us of fake news.
Yes.
They say, oh, that's a fake headline. It wasn't fake when we started. It became fake,
Yes.
or it was fake in the beginning. And so,
Russia is stating that they cannot ignore what's going on. Well, that's a given. This is TASS News Agency today. Russian military cannot ignore NATO's activity in Europe, says the Kremlin.
You're right. So NATO's activity near Russia's border cannot be ignored by the Russian military, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on Monday, speaking about the participation of the Baltic Fleet's warships in naval maneuvers. These actions and NATO's increased activities near our borders cannot be ignored by our military, which is responsible for the security of our country. When asked about whether the participation of the Russian Baltic Fleet's warships in drills could be viewed as a response to the deployment of NATO's forces to Eastern Europe and the Baltic states, Peskov advised reporters to address this question to Russia's defense ministry. But I think it's pretty much a given why they're doing this, because it's definitely in response to NATO's maneuvers and their escalation of the conflict.
Well, when the spokesman for the Kremlin, which is the White House, Russian White House, this is Vladimir Putin's press secretary. When the Russian press secretary says our military cannot ignore what NATO is doing on our border, it doesn't take a lot of intelligence to figure out what he's saying. If it says our military can't ignore, it means they're going to take action.
Right.
Which is what we've been telling our audience. So if your friends and neighbors and coworkers bring up the subject of Ukraine and Russia and war, you need to educate them, because I'm finding in my own personal life people that I know who have no idea at all what this is about. If they're a conservative and they're watching Fox News, they're hearing that Putin is a killer, a murderer, a thug, and he needs to be taken out. If they're a liberal or leftist watching CNN or MSNBC, they're hearing that Putin is a killer, a thug, and a murderer, and he needs to be taken out.
Right.
So it doesn't matter where you go in the United States for news, you're going to get the propaganda. And when you tell your American friends, no, that's not what this is about. This is Russia saying, we're going to defend our country because you're putting tens of thousands of troops and rockets and tanks on our border, and we know what this means. You're going to invade us.
Right.
And they're going to do something about it. Then people say, that's what's going on? I never heard that. That's right. Well, stop watching the propaganda news outlets.
Yes.
Because that's all they're feeding you is propaganda. Now, we're going to bring up here, this is, I saw this for a few minutes yesterday. Mississippi Republican Senator Roger Wicker. He was on Fox News yesterday, and he said, it's time the United States and NATO give Vladimir Putin a bloody nose. Well, how do you give somebody a bloody nose? You punch them in the face. You punch them hard. That's what Senator Wicker is calling for. Now, in a few minutes here, we'll show you, we'll remind you what he said a month or two ago, because he told us how he would give Putin a bloody nose.
Yes.
But here's a soundbite from Fox News with Senator Wicker calling for war with Russia.
Right now, Eric, we're going to get back to Washington. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are rallying support for Ukraine. A bipartisan group of senators traveled to Kyiv last week and met with President Zelensky as a show of solidarity. One of those lawmakers joins us now, Senator Roger Wicker, a Republican from Mississippi who serves on the Armed Services and Commerce Committees. Senator, I want to get first, though, your reaction to these reports of Putin's puppet government plot. What do you think?
Well, the quotes we were getting from Vladimir Putin sounded just like Adolf Hitler in the late 1930s. Hitler couldn't have said it better, saying that we're just interested in protecting our own interests. We're just interested in protecting our own ethnic brothers and sisters in different countries. Here's who Vladimir Putin is. Putin ran the KGB station in East Germany. He was devastated when the USSR broke up, and he's nostalgic for a return to the evil empire that Reagan denounced. And so, yes, it is absolutely believable that this person who has assassinated former members of his government, who has attempted to poison political opponents, who's invaded two of his neighbors, it's absolutely believable that he would find it a lot more convenient to just install a Russian leader as the new president of Ukraine in a political coup. That's the sort of thing that Vladimir Putin has always done, and no one has ever challenged him. Putin is the neighborhood bully, and nobody has ever given this neighborhood bully a bloody nose. I think. So then, Senator. We're going to see some resistance this time.
Hey, first of all, I correct myself. I said Senator Wicker. I get him confused with the former Louisiana senator.
Right, Vickers, yes.
Yeah, the prostitute guy. This is Mississippi Senator Wicker. Okay.
Right, Roger Wicker.
Roger Wicker, and
who only seems to come out of his hole to talk about Russia.
I'm pretty well-versed in politics here. I don't know anything about Roger Wicker. He's like one of these unknown senators. Like you said, the only time he pops out of his hole is when, hey, let's talk about a nuclear war.
Yes.
But who is this guy?
Well, actually, he's a very prominent senator. I mean, he serves on a number of committees. He's on the Senate Armed Services Committee. He's on the Rules and Administration Committee. He's on the Science Committee. He's on the Committee on Environment and Public Works. He's on some influential committees here and everything.
I don't even. Where did he come from?
Well, he's, of course, from Mississippi. He's on the board of deacons, First Baptist Church, Tupelo, Mississippi, sings in the choir when he's in town. He is was served in the Air Force as a judge advocate, and when he got out, worked as an intern for Trent Lott.
Oh, wait a minute, Trent Lott.
Yes.
33rd degree Freemason.
That's right. And so eventually he ran for the Mississippi House, won that, and then ran for Congress and was in Congress from, I think, about 95 to 2007. And then when they were looking for the replacement for Trent Lott, Haley Barbour, the governor of Mississippi, named Mr. Wicker as the Senate, and then he won the special election about a year and a half later, and then he's been serving ever since.
Okay.
And so,
but it just seems like one of those low-key senators that hardly anybody knows about.
Right. Like I said, the only time you ever see him pop up on Fox News is they trot him out whenever they want to talk about, doing something to Russia. Now, we want to remind you, this is the same senator that they had back at first week of December that was talking about don't rule out attacking Russia with nukes and ground troops. Well, you won't need ground troops if you got nukes. So military action could mean that we stand off with our ships in the Black Sea and we rain destruction on Russia military capability.
Just leave that up there for a moment. I want our audience just to look at that. This is December of 21.
Yes.
Just a month ago, the Mississippi Republican senator was calling for the United States to carry out a first strike surprise attack on Russia with nuclear weapons.
And it was a first strike. And so, he was very insistent on that. So Senator Wicker, the second highest ranking Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee, said the U.S. can't rule out any options for responding to Russian aggression, including sending in ground troops or even a nuclear strike. Once again, this was the first week of December. And no less than on Neil Cavuto, he said this out loud. He said in several places, this is probably the most clear message that he sent. When he gets his script down, he gets it down good, Rick.
And then Fox News gives him the platform
Absolutely.
to carry out the propaganda calling for a nuclear war with Russia. That's what Senator Wickers is calling for, nuclear war.
Yes.
I don't know if that doesn't upset you. It really upsets me.
Right. And so when he talks about a bloody nose like he did yesterday.
He's talking about a nuclear war.
Yeah, he's translating that as a nuclear strike. And so here he is back first week of December. Just in case anyone says fake news, this is him back first week of December on Neil Cavuto calling for a nuclear strike on Russia.
All right. What does military action mean, Senator?
Well, military action could mean that we stand off with our ships in the Black Sea and we rain destruction on Russian military capability. It could mean that. It could mean that we participate, and I would not rule that out. I would not rule out American troops on the ground. We don't rule out first use nuclear action. We don't think it'll happen, but there's certain things in negotiations, if you're going to be tough, that you don't take off the table. And so I think the president should say that everything is on the table. And frankly, to the extent that you had Democrats on the show right before me being quoted as saying we need to be tougher, I support that and I appreciate that. I think they represent the fear that we have, the realization that we have in the Congress, that losing a free democratic Ukraine to Russian invasion would be a game changer for a free Europe.
Did you notice he said, we don't rule out nuclear weapons?
Yes.
He didn't say, my personal opinion is we ought to nuke them. He said, we don't rule out a nuclear first strike. Who is we?
Well, he's on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and so he could be speaking on behalf of he's the second highest ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He also said, hey, I've got some Democrat friends that have said, hey, we're in on this too.
Or is we the committee of 300?
Or that. And so, One thing's for sure, they don't bring out Senator Wicker unless they're wanting to nuclear bomb on Russia. And so...
well, I hope our audience takes this very seriously. That there is a very real possibility that the United States is going to carry out a first strike on Russia. This is insane that it's happening. But remember, last week, the Christian cross appeared in the sky over Russia.
Yes.
So that may have been a divine signal to the Russian people that Christ is protecting them. In Germany over the weekend, the chief of the German Navy
Yes.
was forced to resign because he said, you're not going to get Crimea back in control of Ukraine. And what Putin is looking for is respect. If NATO needs to treat him with respect. Because he said that,
Right.
the German political leadership forced him to resign on Sunday.
That's exactly right. What he specifically said was that what he really wants is respect. Respect is low cost, even no cost. It's easy to give him the respect he really demands and probably also deserves. So you can't say that in Germany.
But the NATO military leaders, the guys who actually have to fight,
Yes.
they're saying, why don't we just treat him with respect and work this out? But the warmongers who don't go out and fight, the ones who make a lot of money from war, they fired him for saying that because peace could break out. I mean, you could actually have a settlement without a war, and then you mess up the entire script. So the military man doesn't want to fight. Isn't it always that way?
That's true. They've seen the blood. They've seen the maimed soldiers. They're not, soldiers aren't as bloodthirsty as the media and movies and everything try to make the military out to be. So because they've seen the blood, politicians like Wicker have not seen the blood. So
yeah. So remind you, the current Secretary General of NATO is in line to become the governor of the Bank of Norway.
Right.
He works for the banksters. He works for the banksters.
So leading a military organization qualifies you to run the Central Bank of Norway. Think about that. So, oh well.
The next one is, this is from DW News in Germany. NATO to hold major naval drills in the Mediterranean Sea.
And these are snap drills.
Yeah, these were not planned.
So
that's what's important here. This naval drill was not scheduled.
Right. So just so our audience understands, usually major powers make announcements months, even years in advance. Even Russia does this too, saying we plan on holding drills in a certain area because we don't want to trigger a accidental conflict somewhere. So when they have a snap drill in an international area, such as the Mediterranean, it's very unusual. And of course, the U.S. denied that had anything to do with the current situation over in Ukraine. But there's no such thing as coincidence when it comes to politics. So you have to weigh these things in the balance.
So Russia's having a drill too, a naval drill.
And they had announced these, by the way. So these weren't snap drills.
And it's in an unusual place. It's off the coast of Ireland.
Right. So, but Ireland is saying to Russia, live fire naval exercise is not welcome. Now,
I guess so.
Well, it's not like, sitting 3 miles off the coast of Ireland or anything like that. But these were announced a long time in advance. The only thing that's changed is the current climate in Ukraine. But Ireland has told Russia it plans to host live fire naval exercises off the country's coast aren't welcome. But the Irish defense minister said the country had no power to stop it. It comes amid rising tensions over a buildup of Russia's military forces on the Ukraine border and threatens consequences for any invasion from the U.S. and its allies. I don't know what Ireland's worried about. The Russians not invading Ireland.
So right here,
right.
Go ahead.
So you're a good, about 200-300 miles off the coast of Ireland, and so it's
but a long way from Russia.
Yes, but
why are the Russians off the coast of Ireland? I mean, they're showing NATO.
Yes,
we're going to come into your backyard.
Yes, absolutely.
By the way, True News, our filmmaker Matt Scow is in Ireland right now.
Yes,
working on The Greatest Reset. So maybe Matt can get some exclusive video of the Russian warships off the coast of Ireland
as they pass by. And so
he's just south of Dublin right now, so he could drive down to the coastline.
Well, you remember the reports back, was it Thursday or Friday? We talked about the Russian ships that were coming down through the channel and everything. And some of these ships were, heading to the Baltics and everything. But these naval drills are still scheduled yet to happen. They're not happening at the moment. So,
hey, we'll jump down to number 26. This is TASS, Russian diplomat slams report of Xi Jinping asking Putin not to attack Ukraine. And Miss Marta there, the press secretary of the Russian Foreign Ministry, she said this is jaw-dropping fake news. So the story said, this broke over the weekend.
Right, so a Bloomberg report about Chinese President Xi Jinping allegedly asking Russian leader Vladimir Putin not to attack Ukraine during the Beijing Olympics is spectacular fake news, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova told the Echo of Moscow radio station on Monday. So apparently Bloomberg had made the report that there was a conversation went on between the Russian and Chinese leaders that it might be bad news if something were to happen during the Olympics. South China Morning Post, well, before we get to that, it says Bloomberg has publicized utter jaw-dropping fake news recently, claiming that Xi Jinping had asked Putin not to attack Ukraine. Frankly speaking, I did not expect this level of disinformation from Bloomberg, not because it is an unconfirmed fact, but because it is sheer impossibility and unbelievable stupidity. I could have expected it from some U.S. newspaper, but not from Bloomberg. They used to be less susceptible to these types of propped-up leaks, but now they seem to have given up on that, Zakharova said.
I think when I was introducing his doc, I misspoke, and instead of saying Marie Zakharova, I think I said Maria Bartiromo from Fox Business.
I figured we were going to correct it.
It's Monday. It's Monday. All right, give me a break here.
This is what the Chinese English readers are seeing in this story right now from the South China Morning Post. China denies Xi asked Putin not to invade Ukraine. Sheer fiction, as they say. China on Monday dismissed a report suggesting President Xi Jinping may have asked his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin not to invade Ukraine during the Beijing Winter Olympic Games. As tensions escalate between Moscow and the West amid fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, the attitude of Russia's giant neighbor and close partner has come under scrutiny. A report by Bloomberg, quoting an anonymous diplomat, said it was possible Xi had asked Putin during their recent call not to invade Ukraine during the Beijing Games. Well, I wonder if Xi Jinping could ask NATO not to invade Ukraine during the Olympic Games. Is that a possibility?
So what we have happening here, and this is really, there's been a spike of it in the past 72 hours, and that is CIA-written propaganda news. It's popping up everywhere. And so this story that they're referring to in Bloomberg is one of them. So Bloomberg went along with it, published a story. We got a reliable source that said Xi Jinping called Putin, said, "Come on, Vlad, we got the games going on over here. Don't go start World War III while we're having the 2022 COVID games." I mean, just knock it off. It's all propaganda.
I would believe Xi Jinping calling Mark Milley and saying, please don't invade Ukraine during the Olympics. Hold off for a little while.
But there's a lot of this. Like Boris Johnson, he had a propaganda story. Putin is going to seize the capital city of Kyiv. He's got a secret plan to install a puppet government.
Yeah, that's the latest.
You mean to replace
the puppet government
that the CIA put in there after McCain started a revolution over there? I mean, what do you have in Ukraine right now is a puppet government. John McCain and Victoria Nuland under the Obama administration went to Ukraine and told the Nazis, and they were Nazis.
They were actual Nazis.
They were Nazis, and they said, if you riot and cause a disruption, the United States of America will back you, and if you can overthrow the elected government of Ukraine, we will recognize you. That is a fact. John McCain was there on behalf of Obama.
Yes.
And there was a revolution, and the CIA helped orchestrate it. And so there is a puppet government in Ukraine right now. Let's see, should I say it or not? The president of Ukraine is Jewish. The prime minister of Ukraine is Jewish. I guess that's probably irrelevant.
Or coincidental. It could be,
Okay.
right? But they weren't before.
But we're having a war now, aren't they? Yeah, we're going to have a war. Go figure. Just go figure. What's happening here, folks? We're going to have a war. And a lot of people are going to die because the banksters are orchestrating events to start a war. And I'm speaking out against it. I don't know where the conservatives are anymore. I don't know where the anti-war leftists are anymore. I just know I'm here. I've got a platform. I'm speaking out against war. War is going to end up destroying millions of lives, changing the world for the next 100 years. You think this is going to... You think these people, they're calling for war. You really think NATO and Russia are going to war, and next week you're going to take your vacation that you have that you have planned? Your life's
That's what they think. No,
yeah.
they really think that.
They do.
Because it has no impact on them. They don't believe it. It's not real to them.
I know. They're deluded. Their sin, their lust has caused their minds to be warped, and they have a delusion that's blinding them to reality. Any sensible person knows a war between Russia and NATO is going to end up with possibly 100 million people dead. Maybe 1 billion people. If this goes to full-scale war with scalar weapons and directed energy weapons and biological and chemical weapons.
Because it's not going to be confined to Europe.
No.
I mean, the pandemic wasn't confined to a particular area. We're just in phase 2 of all this. And so, Russia is not just sitting back and taking the propaganda lying down. Russia has been very active on social media lately, addressing some of the concerns and some of the different issues that have been thrown at them. And so on their official Ministry of Foreign Affairs Twitter account, they are responding to the State Department's release of a fact sheet about Russia and everything related to Ukraine. And so they wanted to go through step by step and answer all the objections that the U.S. State Department put out there as facts, and they want to be able to address it. So we wanted to show it to you, the audience. They did a great job in explaining each one of the points that the State Department talked about. The first one is Russia invaded the Ukraine in 2014 and occupies Crimea. Well, as Rick has reported many times in the past, the blame for establishing Ukraine lies with the U.S. and NATO, which supported the coup in February 2014, and the Ukrainian nationalists. And the people of Crimea and Donbas chose not to live under that puppet government.
Under the Nazis.
Right. They said, you know what? No, Nazis were bad the first time. We don't want them the second time. So another fact that they were throwing out there, Rick, is that this is fact in quotes. Russia blames others for its own aggression. Well, the reality is that Ukraine and NATO are building up military activity near Russia's borders and conducting large-scale multinational military exercises. As we pointed out many times, if there was a massive line of military building up across the Texas border in Mexico, we would be responding with tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of troops on our own border. Another fact that they've been disputing here, deploying 100,000 plus Russian troops is a threat to Ukraine's sovereignty. And they say by sending weapons to Ukraine, the U.S. is encouraging Kyiv's aggressive actions against its own population in Donbas. And so when we reported earlier today, Rick, about all those Stinger missiles and now Javelin missiles and everything being sent to Lithuania and Latvia and now being sent to Ukraine, basically the U.S. is funding the Ukraine by giving that military equipment to Ukraine. They're fighting people that have already made a choice to leave Ukraine, that people in the Donbas area. And so that's what's happening as well. Another fact that Russia is trying to dispute here, Russia is using disinformation to create a pretext for war. Well, they respond that the U.S. is using disinformation as a pretext to invade independent states. So, for instance, Colin Powell's infamous vial helped destroy Iraq. He's talking about the weapons of mass destruction there. And they've got a point there. Fact 5, there are no reports of any Russian speakers being under threat in Ukraine. Well, that is absolutely not true because that's happening in Donbas every day. Ukraine's government passes discriminatory laws while ousting the Russian language from all spheres of life. So what's happened for our audience is several years ago, the Ukrainian government passed a law that Russia used to be one of the legal languages of Ukraine. And after they passed the law, if you were a Russian speaker only, basically you were left out of the government. You couldn't access anything. And so
they also separated the church.
That's true. They broke up the church.
Orthodox Church was under the Orthodox Church of Russia.
And so they actually split the church up into the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church. And then the Russian Orthodox Church had absolutely no rights in Ukraine after that. So that's another example of the way the Nazis work in Ukraine. So fact 6, meetings and phone calls held to resolve the situation peacefully. Russia is saying instead of responding to our initiatives on security guarantees, the U.S. launched a campaign depicting Russia as an aggressor. And so the State Department simply is saying, hey, we've been trying to work this situation out. Russia is disputing this with great passion.
All right, so think about, let's say you're in a business dispute and you agree to mediation.
Right.
And the person who is attacking you comes to the mediation meeting and pretends that he or she wants to agree to mediation to solve the issue. But as soon as the meeting is over, that person goes out on the street and tells everybody, you're a rotten, dirty snake. Okay. What are the chances of mediation at that point?
Nil.
Right.
And they know that.
That's what the Russians are saying. So the meeting that was held last Friday between Lavrov and Blinken, as soon as the meeting was over, the propaganda news story started.
Yes.
Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, which destroyed any goodwill that may have come out of that meeting on Friday. But those stories were written before the meeting.
That's true.
They had a plan. I'm talking about the NATO propagandists. They had a plan.
So, to me, the only reason why they even had the conversation to begin with was to allow more time to get military aid into Ukraine.
Yes.
So
they're stalling. And that's why the Russians keep saying, bring your answers in writing.
Yes.
Because they know that NATO's stalling to get more troops into Eastern Europe.
Well, another thing they point out, they say, well, NATO is a defensive alliance. Well, that alliance has discredited itself with the operation against Yugoslavia. True. The invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan by NATO members. And who are they defending themselves against? Is anyone attacking NATO? What NATO nation is under attack right now, Rick?
Why did NATO bomb Libya in the Middle East?
Was Libya attacking another a NATO nation?
I remember the reason NATO gave for bombing Libya. They said there were protests in Libya. Of course, orchestrated another color revolution orchestrated by George Soros and the CIA. And NATO said, if we don't bomb Gaddafi, Muammar Gaddafi, he might rough up the protesters.
And so what was the conclusion?
Yeah. So, democracy won't flourish if we don't bomb Libya into the Stone Age.
So we're going to bomb them into democracy.
Yes.
That's the strategy,
yes.
right?
And then immediately after they killed Gaddafi, they installed a terrorist.
Right.
A real terrorist with the support of NATO.
Yes. And they're still dealing with that issue.
And they got the gold.
Yes. And the water. And the water.
And the water. Everywhere NATO goes, they get the gold. And the artifacts, the Babylonian artifacts.
Well, obviously NATO is not a defensive alliance, it's an offensive alliance. Fact number 8 here, NATO never promised not to admit new members. Now, that is absolutely not true, because back in 1990, U.S. Secretary of State James Baker issued guarantees that there would be no extension of NATO's jurisdiction. And so that is, you can look it up, you can go and verify it yourself. NATO has made that promise, or at least U.S. Secretary of State James Baker made that promise on behalf of NATO. Another one, NATO enlargement is not directed against Russia. Well, then who is it directed against? Because NATO is not expanding in Africa. NATO is not expanding in the Middle East. It's only expanding along its border with Russia. So over the past 20 years, all NATO coalition forces have been concentrated primarily on its eastern flank. And so those are some of the facts that were in the State Department's report from January 20th. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs wanted to respond to those because they can't get the message out any other way except on social media. So,
Doc, public schools in America are now teaching little school children how to spot propaganda and misinformation.
Really?
Yes, of course.
So they're teaching this in Christian schools or what?
No, this is in public schools. Of course,
schools.
They would classify true news as propaganda and misinformation.
Oh, okay.
Okay. If you were talking about the truth about the fake vaccines, you would be spreading misinformation. So they're now teaching the little children how to not listen to people who are telling the truth. See, this is George Orwell. People who are telling the truth are labeled as bad people. The people who are lying are good people. But I want to show you a video from CNN, of all places, CNN.
Oh, the propaganda outlet.
Yes. With their 90% drop in viewership, I don't know if there's anybody other than the employees' mothers watching CNN. But here's a little propaganda report from CNN.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Barbara King wants to arm this 8th grade class.
All right, so today's topic is misinformation.
With the tools they will need in a world of information saturation.
We're going to learn to identify the various types of misinformation.
And there is a lot to learn.
They're called satire, false context, imposter content, manipulated content, and fabricated content.
Just imagine trying to make sense of all of this as a teenager.
Now we go to imposter content. What does imposter mean?
Like someone trying to be someone else.
Someone trying to be someone else, right? You hear that word, what's an imposter? So an imposter content uses either a well-known name, a brand, or a logo to fool people into believing that it's authentic.
As the web becomes even more of a Wild West every day, the students here at PS 207 in Queens, New York, know that they need these lessons.
A lot of students have social media, and if they're looking at stuff that is wrong and just telling everyone that it's right, and they're just giving everyone false information.
King began teaching media literacy 7 years ago. Why the initial impulse to teach about this?
I feel it's a skill that my students really need. There's too much misinformation around us in the world, and I want to give them some tools to make sense of what they're seeing.
I wonder if she put Adam Schiff's picture on the screen.
Probably not, because they would say Adam Schiff is speaking truth. And there's the current ultimate propaganda
Maybe Robert Steele
meister.
and his dossier. Could that be an example of disinformation? CNN, of all people, all places, reporting on disinformation. But apparently a lot of people are realizing that CNN can be believed because they have experienced a 90% drop in viewership in the past year. In some place, they got to go out of business. Why would you continue buying ads on a network that had a 90%? Doc, you and I have both been in the media business selling advertising.
Right.
If you had a 90% drop in a radio station that you were representing, could you keep selling ads to the local car dealer?
No, I'd have to sell to the bingo hall or something like that. I wouldn't have a decent account, that's for sure.
The bank, everybody would leave.
Because the car dealer would say,
there's nobody watching.
Doc, nobody's listening to the radio station.
But money
But if they're idealists, they still pump money.
The money keeps flowing to CNN and MSNBC
right.
because it's laundered money.
That's right.
It's dark money. CNN's budget is about $1 billion a year, and they've lost 90% of their audience, but they still get the billion. How is that? It's dark money. We're in a Masonic matrix, folks. We're inside a Masonic matrix. You've got to fight to get the truth. I want to show you a couple of headlines before we wrap it up, just to show you that this war fever is not confined to Ukraine. The next one, this is Jerusalem Post. Will joint Russian-Syrian air patrols make Israel's airstrikes harder?
Well, I sure hope so.
Yeah, Israel just bombs Syria any day they want to, for any reason, and they get away with it. Why? Because they're Zionists, and what are you going to do about it? So if they want to bomb Syria today, they bomb Syria. Well, something changed today, Doc. Today. It changed today. Let's read this quote.
So Syrian and Russian military jets patrolled together on Monday near Syria's border with Israel. The report comes as tensions in Ukraine are at a boiling point, with Western powers accusing Russia of plotting an invasion. The Russian joint patrols with Syria could become a regular event, Russia's indicated. These reports have come from Russia's defense ministry and Interfax News. This has ramifications for Israel and could impact Israel's operations targeting Iranian weapons transfers to Hezbollah. And so,
it could also interfere with Zionists attempting to decapitate Christians in Syria,
right?
And dressed up as Muslim terrorists. It could interfere with the Zionist plans to take control of the Syrian country and make it Israel. It could interfere with a lot of stuff like that.
Right.
Okay? So don't rule out the possibility that one day Russia bombs Tel Aviv. That's where this is going.
Right.
Doc, this is really serious stuff.
And so what's the significance of Russia amping this up? Do you think that they're thinking if there's a move in Ukraine that Israel's going to ramp up its efforts in Syria?
Yes.
And that the world's just going to look the other way while it goes on?
Yeah.
So,
and that the U.S. and NATO and the Zionists may try to open up a war front in the Middle East and attack Syria, which is an ally of Russia. And there are a lot of Christians in Syria, and that war that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton started resulted in the slaughter of thousands of Syrian Christians, their decapitation of pastors, the destruction of ancient churches.
Yes.
Churches that had been there for 2,000 years. They were destroyed. It wasn't Muslims doing it. It was the Zionists that are doing it. And Russia came to the defense of the Syrian Christians in Aleppo. And there was a showdown in Aleppo. And that's when the U.S. and NATO backed out of Aleppo.
The cost was going to be too high for them.
They weren't willing to fight Russia over Aleppo. They didn't prepare. They weren't prepared for Russia to intervene in that war. Okay, so something happened today that Russian military planes began escorting Syrian planes in what? The defense of Syria.
At the invitation of Syria.
At the invitation of Syria. Okay, Syria has not invited the United States into their country, but we're there. We have military bases in the country, uninvited. How would you like to be the president of a country and you got foreign bases in your country?
Sucking the oil out.
Sucking the oil out, and your country's too small militarily to do anything about it. That's where Syria is at. They just have to put up with the U.S. there. And who did it? Trump. Trump did it. Okay? So all you Trumpers, you have to come to terms with what he did. Either you defend it, take ownership of it, or you criticize it. That's when I broke with Trump. When I saw him bombing Syria, I said, oh, we got another one. The same routine. Nothing has changed. We got snookered again. Or they had their hooks into Trump and said, do what we tell you to do, or we make life miserable for you.
And what got me was him doubling down and said, and we're taking the oil right out of the ground.
And bragged about it.
Yeah, he said, we're doing it every day. I love it. I love that we're stealing the oil. That's what Donald Trump said.
Then I'll show you another one. This is South China Morning Post in Hong Kong. Taiwan scrambles jets after Beijing sends 52 aircraft to island's air defense zone in 2 days. So that's what happened over the weekend. We could have a war that's being fought in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, and Asia. That's called a world war.
Yes.
That's called World War III.
I mean, you look at a global map right now extending from Taiwan across Korean Peninsula. You've got Kim Jong-un there. Go across China to Kazakhstan. They're still having conflicts there. Russia's involved there. Slip on over now to Syria. Turkey has said they're going to stand up against Russia along with NATO. You got a conflict there. So you've got the entire Russian border and now the Chinese involved. We could look at a global conflict, and most people, Rick, have no idea what's going on.
No, they have no idea, and they don't care, and it doesn't affect them until the war is in their backyard in the United States. Good time to stock up on supplies, food, necessities. A war, even if it doesn't touch the continental United States.
Right. You think we have supply chain issues now, which are manufactured. Wait till the real supply chain issues kick in.
That's right. Wait until the chain has been bombed. Okay? And there is no supply chain because a war between NATO and Russia is not going to be confined to a small geographical area. It's going to be widespread. It's going to have major disruptions on society. So the tension is extremely high. The likelihood of war is the highest I've seen since I have been doing True News. And I am taking this very seriously, and I'm praying and interceding that Almighty God will intervene and prevent these warmongers from starting a war. And I encourage you to join with me in prayer. We don't have to let these people get away with their madness. People need to speak out. And for what it's worth, call your congressman and your senator, do all that stuff. Let them hear from you saying, I don't want a war. Go to house.gov and senate.gov and find your senator and your congressman and send them a message saying, I don't want war. Let them hear. They're not hearing anything from anybody. And if enough people start speaking out, they'll get the message. Maybe this war is not popular.
Maybe.
Yeah. But there's another reason, and we don't have time today, but it has to do with what happened in the stock market today. All right? When things start going bad, what do? You start a war.
Yes.
Okay? So they've milked COVID for all that they can get out of it. That's wrapping up. All right, that narrative is falling apart. The economy is falling apart. You got to do something. You got to create a new crisis.
Yes.
You need a war. All right. We'll talk about it tomorrow. God bless. See ya.
God bless you.